Hello everybody, my name is Rachel Toren and next to me is Professor David Passig, my spouse. He is a futurist specializing in future technologies, and we will make a little discourse in our living room relating to the coronavirus period. David is usually giving lectures to a large amount of audience, but due to the lockdown and all the restrictions, we are moving the lectures to our living room, and we will hope to make it something short and interesting. And we will start by introducing you. David, maybe talk something about what you're doing, about the methodology.
I'm a faculty member at the university here in Israel. I'm specializing in future technologies. In my lab, we are developing two kinds of technologies: virtual reality, 3D immersive virtual reality, and brain computer interface. I did my PhD in future studies at the University of Minnesota in the US. And it's been already something like 30 years in which I'm trying to figure out the trends in different variables, from specific future communication technologies and their impact on different variables, from economic variables to social variables to conflict variables, and of course geopolitic variables.
You already published 3 books, bestsellers, and now the 4th one is about to be published, about the future of Judaism, and you're working already on the 5th one.
All right.
So maybe only give in English the names of your books.
The first book is actually a summary of methodologies in which I'm trying to do 16 predictions about economy, about social life in the 21st century. The second book is titled 2048, trying to figure out the world conflicts of the first half of the 21st century.
This one was translated to English.
To English, to Turkish, to different languages.
Okay.
The third is titled For Cognito, which means how our mind is developing to understand and figure out the trends, okay, like forward cognition. The fourth, which is about to be published, is trying to figure out the trends of how the Jewish narrative is developing during the last 4 millennia. And the fourth is about how our...
The
fifth is about our consciousness and how our consciousness is developing. It seems that humanity is really going through some stages that are really distinct and can be clarified, and I'm very much interested how humanity is going to experience consciousness in the next stage of its evolution.
Okay, now let's get into the subject about the coronavirus. First of all, you were one of few people, futurists, that predicted the pandemic now. Can you explain how you did it, how you came to this conclusion?
Well, I'm not the only one. A lot of people have been already speaking about it in the last 2 decades. It was quite obvious that something huge is about to happen. We are already millions of years dealing with different kinds of viruses. And it was only a matter of time until a virus will jump from an animal, do a mutation, and will have a great impact on humanity. And one of the reasons is that, first of all, it's happening almost every century or two. And for the first time in the 21st century, there are about 8 billion people worldwide. Never were so many people on this planet. Very much packed together, more than 50% are packed on urban settings, very much close to each other. And of course, we are raising a lot of animals to provide us some very, very, very important ingredients in our nutrition. It was only a matter of time that something will jump from an animal. The assumption is that it will probably happen in China because there are a lot of people over there and they are really very much packed and they are eating a lot of animals without any hygiene or natural or sufficient hygiene in their markets. It was only a matter of time that it will spread all over the world. Of course, this is the first time that we are aware of those kind of things. It used to be that people were not aware that something is happening until it was really very, very dangerous. Now, with our technologies, with our medicine, with our institutes, global and local, we are trying to manage this pandemic in a very different way, and hopefully we will be able to somehow control it so that it will not have the effect as the other pandemics had on humanity. Because if we were not to do anything, the studies were speaking about between 100 million to 300 million people that will die from this virus in a matter of 5 to 10 years.
This is if we do nothing.
If we do nothing.
Let
if we
the
will
nature
just
do its best.
Let nature do what experts are calling the herd vaccine.
Okay. Maybe you can just clarify the differences between different kinds of futures and the probability of their happening, and about the time frames you are relating to.
Okay. In future studies, we tend to divide the futures we are studying. That's why it's called, the discipline is called futures studies. It's not, there's no one future. There are actually infinite futures. And we're trying to organize those futures into 4 categories. The first category of futures is based upon the methodologies with which we are doing those studies. And this category is called the category of probable futures, which means that the methodologies are assuring us that whatever we think is going to happen probably will happen with something like 70%, at least 70% chance.
This is high.
This is very high. Okay, we are very primitive into understanding how systems are evolving, because future studies is a branch of futures thinking. Okay, we try to understand how systems are evolving. We are still very primitive in understanding systems. So whenever we say that we understand the logic of a system with some 70% degree of probability, that's really very high.
Okay,
so this is the first category. There is a second category that is based upon the methodologies that are assuring us that something like 50% of what we think is going to happen will actually happen. So this is called the possible futures. And there is a third category of methodologies with which we are trying to figure out what we call the wildcard futures. Things that are really unusual or imaginable, or at least at this point, whenever we try to understand the trends, are really unique. And the methodologies are assuring us that something like between 20 to 30% chance that they will happen at the end.
And this is different than what we call black swan.
Totally different. People are confusing those terms. Black swan means that there is a chance of 2 to 3% that something will happen. There are always black swans in systems, and we don't tend to invest in those kind of occurrences, if you wish. We are very much interested in things that are 20 to 30% chance that will happen, because if they will happen, then the systems will be shaken in their foundations. And that's why we tend to put some efforts to figure out those trends beforehand. Black swans are impossible to predict, so we just put them aside.
Okay.
And there is a fourth category of methodologies, which is called the category of preferable futures. We are developing also methodologies with which we are clarifying what is really preferable to us, not just wishful thinking, what is really preferable to us to realize. And when we clarify those preferable futures, it's much easier to engage into realizing those futures. These are the four categories of methodologies, and each category has what we call a predictive reliability.
Okay. And now maybe you can clarify the differences between the time frames.
When we speak about the future, we tend to divide the future into 5 time frames. I'll just mention 3 here. Okay? There is the immediate future, which is about a year to, at the best, 2 or 3 years ahead. That's the immediate future. There is the short-term future, which is between 3 years ahead to, at the best, 10 years ahead, plus minus 5-7 years. Okay? And there is the midterm future, which is about 10 to 30 years. It depends on different subject matters. Okay, there are subject matters that 30 years is really midterm. Okay, for example, space industries, 30 years is really midterm. And there is a long term, okay, which is 50 years ahead, and very long term, which is 100 years ahead. And different futurists are specializing in different categories of futures thinking and different time frames.
Okay, so let's start with the immediate future.
Well, the immediate future of this pandemic is something that everybody is speaking about at this point in time. We are, at mid-April 2020, and people are speaking about the day after this pandemic. But the day after this pandemic is divided into different time frames. People speak about the day after as one entity, as if a year from now everything is going to be the same. But actually, different time frames have different kinds of futures. So let's start with the immediate future. Okay, a lot of people in that immediate future are saying a lot of things. Many experts are saying whatever they are saying from a very disciplinary point of view. What is very unique in future studies is that we are bringing together different point of views, these different disciplines, and we are trying to see how those disciplines are interacting in order to say something that is much more reliable about the future. So I'm aware of very few studies that were done that are really bringing together different kinds of variables together to really understand what might happen in the immediate future. One of them was just published in Science journal, in which the researchers have devised a series of immediate scenarios. And these are scenarios that were done trying to figure out different variables. They did a few scenarios. I'll just mention some of them. The first scenario that was devised in that study speaks about a scenario in which there is one large lockdown. And then you just cannot continue with that lockdown because of different reasons, from economic to social, psychological, etc., etc. In that case, then, and if there is no change in the virus because of the coming summer, in that case, we'll